The storm shook the old nursing home, but it wasn't the thunder that made Rex growl. It was what he smelled beneath the basement floor, a secret buried for decades, waiting to be found. The storm rolled over Crestwood Nursing Home, with heavy rain tapping against the windows and wind howling through the old gutters. Most of the residents were asleep by then, tucked into their rooms, with the soft hum of televisions or the low hiss of oxygen machines for company. The hallways were dim and quiet, only the occasional squeak of shoes from the night staff breaking the silence. Rex, the German shepherd who served both as a therapy dog and a watchful guardian, paced near the front lobby, his ears twitching at every rumble of thunder. He was used to storms, had seen worse in his training days, but something about tonight made his muscles tight and his eyes restless. Nurse Kelly was making her rounds with a clipboard pressed against her chest when she noticed Rex was no longer lying near the reception desk where he usually curled up during the night shift. Instead, he had moved toward the basement door at the far end of the corridor, his head lowered, his nose pressed hard against the crack where the frame met the floor. She stopped, listening, but heard nothing other than the rain outside. "What's got into you?" she asked, softly. But Rex didn't move. His growl came low and steady, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. At first, Kelly thought he was reacting to the storm. Maybe some smell carried through the vents or the memory of thunder during his early years, but when she called his name, Rex didn't turn. He began pawing at the floor, his nails clicking against the tile, as if he was trying to dig through the building itself. The sound echoed unnaturally in the quiet hallway, sharp and urgent, and it set her nerves on edge. "Rex, stop," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder in case a resident had wandered out of their room. The dog ignored her. His body was tense, his tail rigid, his breathing fast. Two orderlies walking past laughed when they saw the dog. "Looks like he's after mice," one said, shaking his head. "These old buildings are full of them." Kelly forced a small smile, but unease settled deeper into her chest. She had worked with Rex long enough to know the difference between a distraction and a warning. This wasn't chasing shadows. This was something else. His ears stayed fixed forward, every fiber of his body locked on whatever was beneath that patch of floor. The storm outside cracked with a bolt of lightning. The lights flickered, and Rex barked suddenly, sharp and powerful, a sound that made the orderlies stop in their tracks. Kelly flinched, her clipboard slipping against her chest. The dog lowered his head again, nose pressed to the base of the storage door, pawing faster now, more frantic. His bark turned into a howl, a sound that seemed filled with urgency, almost desperation. The air in the hallway grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting. Kelly crouched beside him, pressing a hand to his back. His fur was damp with sweat, though the air was cool. His muscles trembled beneath her touch, coiled and ready. "Something's wrong," she whispered, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. The storm outside was only noise. The real trouble was coming from below. Rex had never been a difficult dog before. Not with food, not with rest, not with anything. He was steady, dependable, the kind of animal who comforted the residents during long afternoons and eased the edge off their loneliness. But after that stormy night, something inside him changed. When breakfast came the next morning, he barely touched it, only sniffed at the bowl before walking away. When the recreation room filled with chatter and card games, he ignored the friendly calls from the residents and padded straight down the hall to the basement door. He planted himself there, nose pressed to the crack, paws scratching, muscles shaking with stubborn energy. The staff tried to laugh it off. One nurse joked that he had found the ghost of Crestwood. Another said maybe he had caught the scent of a rat. Someone tossed a ball down the hall to distract him, but he did not chase it. He only returned, again and again, to that same spot in the corridor. By evening, his food still sat untouched in the stainless steel bowl, the water half gone only because Kelly coaxed him into drinking. His eyes were tired, but his focus never wavered. He slept for only minutes at a time, ears twitching, head lifting at the smallest creak in the floor. Then he would rise, walk back to the basement, and settle there as if waiting for something no one else could sense. Arthur Greaves, who had seen more than most men ever should in his 80 years, watched all this from his wheelchair by the common room. His body was old, his hands shaking, but his memory was sharp, and it pulled him back to jungles and deserts, and all the places where dogs like Rex had saved lives. He rolled forward, eyes narrowed, and studied the shepherd with the kind of seriousness that silenced his usual gruff humor. "He's telling you something," Arthur said at last, his voice rough but steady. The staff chuckled politely, not really listening, but Kelly heard it. She knew Arthur did not waste words, and she knew the look in his eyes was one of recognition, not imagination. That night, Kelly stayed longer after her shift ended, sitting on the floor near Rex while the halls grew quiet. She stroked his fur, feeling the tension rippling through him. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. "What are you trying to say?" He pressed closer to the door, nose working furiously, body trembling like a bow pulled tight. The sound of his claws against the tile echoed in her ears long after she left. By the next morning, Kelly made her decision. She picked up the phone and called Officer Daniel Cross, the man who had trained Rex and trusted him enough to place him at Crestwood. She explained everything: the growling, the pawing, the refusal to eat, the way Arthur had recognized the signs. Cross listened without interrupting, his silence heavy. When she finished, there was a long pause before he answered. "I'll be there tonight," he said. Kelly looked down the hall at Rex, still crouched low by the basement door, and for the first time she felt her own certainty match his. Whatever was waiting beneath Crestwood, the dog already knew. When Officer Daniel Cross arrived that evening, he came in wearing his uniform, but without the hardened expression that usually sat on his face. He had worked with Rex for years, and knew the dog's strengths and quirks, knew how steady his nerves were, and how unlikely it was for him to fixate without reason. Still, he had to see it for himself before making judgments. Kelly led him down the quiet hall, past the residents who watched with mild curiosity, and stopped at the basement corridor. There, as though nothing else in the world mattered, Rex crouched close to the floor with his nose pressed against the crack of the door. His tail didn't wag, his eyes didn't soften. He was a soldier on guard. Cross knelt beside him, rubbed the dog's ear, and said, "All right, partner, show me what's got you stirred up." Rex gave a low growl, then pressed his paws against the tile and scratched, claws clicking with sharp insistence. Cross stood, sighed, and rapped his knuckles against the floor, meaning to humor him. The sound he expected was the dull thud of concrete, nothing more. But instead, faint as a whisper, came a hollow ring. He tapped again. The same strange echo answered back, thin and deep. Kelly covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "You hear that, don't you?" she whispered. Cross did not reply right away. He leaned down, placed his ear close to the floor, and knocked once more. The vibration carried differently than it should have, like there was a space beneath them instead of solid earth. Rex barked so hard the sound rattled through the corridor. He scratched until his nails chipped, desperate to break through. The commotion drew two maintenance workers who had been fixing a pipe in another wing. They grumbled at first, thinking it was just another false alarm from the dog, but when Cross gestured for them to try the floor themselves, they frowned and knelt down. One of them used a wrench to strike the tile. The echo was unmistakable now, a hollow cavity responding to the blow. They pried at the seams, between tiles, and found what none of them had expected: a thin crack, almost invisible, running across the floor and ending near the base of the wall. Dust seeped out when they pressed against it. One worker muttered that the building was nearly a century old, full of patched foundations and forgotten crawl spaces, but his words didn't convince anyone. Rex's fury grew sharper, his barks echoing through the halls until residents peeked out of their rooms, frightened and curious. Arthur wheeled forward, eyes grim. "That's no crawl space," he said. "That's a vent. I've seen them before. Military tunnels, hidden supply shafts. He knows something's down there. No one wanted to believe him, not really. Because believing meant that beneath this place of rest and care, something darker waited. But as Cross crouched beside the dog and felt the vibration under his palm, he knew the truth was already pressing up against them. The old building was hiding secrets, and Rex had just forced them into the light. The hallways of Crestwood fell silent once the last lights were dimmed and the residents drifted to sleep, but in the basement corridor, the silence was broken by the scrape of metal on stone. Cross had returned long after visiting hours, carrying a crowbar, a hammer, and a flashlight. Kelly stood beside him with a nervous grip on her sweater sleeves, her eyes darting toward the stairs, as if expecting someone to catch them at any moment. Arthur was there too, wheeled close to the wall, his old soldier's face set in the kind of grim patience that comes from knowing what happens when warnings are ignored. Rex paced between them, restless, his nose pressed again and again to the crack in the floor, growling low in his throat like a warning to hurry. Cross knelt and set the flashlight down, so the beam cut across the cracked tiles. He tapped them once more with the hammer, and the hollow echo answered like before, only louder, in the stillness of night. Dust puffed into the air when he struck harder, sending Kelly into a cough. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, his body tensing, as if he knew what lay below did not want to be disturbed. Cross muttered, "Easy, boy. We're just going to take a look," though his own voice carried unease. He raised the hammer and struck with force. The tile split, a jagged line spreading out, and flakes of concrete scattered across the floor. Blow after blow, the echo grew deeper, until at last the concrete gave way to something that rang metallic. Arthur leaned forward in his chair, his knuckles white on the armrest. "That's not foundation," he said. "That's a cover." Cross used the crowbar next, slipping the tip into the widening crack. He levered the stone up, grunting as dust and grit spilled out in clouds. Kelly covered her nose and mouth, her heart racing as she watched the floor slowly give way to something unnatural. The crowbar screeched against rusted steel, and when the final slab came loose, they all froze. Embedded beneath the floor was a square hatch, old and corroded, its surface mottled with decades of rust. A single handle sat flush against it, worn smooth with use long ago. Rex backed up a step, hackles rising, his growl steady now, deeper, almost primal. He circled the hatch once, then planted himself in front of it, chest low, nose twitching at the faint current of cold air that leaked through the seams. Cross bent down and gripped the handle, but when he pulled it didn't move. The lock wasn't on the outside, it was sealed from within. For a long moment no one spoke. Then it came. A sound so soft it might have been imagination, except that all three of them heard it. A knock, faint and deliberate, from beneath the hatch. Kelly staggered back, her hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide with fear. Arthur whispered, "Dear God." Rex pressed his paws to the steel, barking with a force that shook the dust from the ceiling, as if to tell them the truth no one wanted to accept. Something alive was waiting below. The air in the basement seemed to thicken the moment the faint knock reached them. Kelly's breath caught in her throat, and Arthur gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles shone white. Cross leaned closer to the hatch, his ear hovering inches from the rusted surface, and he pounded his fist against it. The echo carried down into the dark. Then silence pressed in again. For a long second nothing happened, and Kelly almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Then it came again, 3 deliberate raps from below, slow and certain. Rex exploded into sound, barking so fiercely the walls vibrated, his claws scraping hard against the steel hatch. He whined, then let out a long, desperate howl that raised the hairs on Kelly's arms. He wasn't confused, wasn't playing, wasn't chasing shadows. Something was alive down there. Cross's heart thudded in his chest as he crouched and placed his palm flat on the hatch. It was cold as stone, but beneath that chill he could feel the faintest tremor, like vibrations from movement in the space below. He whispered, "Someone's down there." Kelly fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so much she nearly dropped it. She called the sheriff, speaking quickly, her words tumbling out, but his reply came slow and heavy with irritation. "Old pipes," he said flatly. "That place is 100 years old. You're hearing echoes. Don't go scaring the residents with ghost stories." Kelly tried to argue, her voice sharp with panic, but he cut her off. "Do not stir panic in that home. You'll make things worse. Stand down." The line went dead in her hand. She stared at the phone like it had betrayed her, her pulse racing in her ears. Arthur muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "He's wrong. That's no pipe. I know what I heard, and so does that dog." Rex's body pressed flat against the hatch now, his claws clicking, his breath heavy. He looked back at Cross with wild amber eyes, a silent plea to be believed. Cross ran a hand over his jaw, torn between duty and instinct. He had worked with Rex for years. The dog had never failed him, never warned without cause. Kelly crouched down beside Rex, her voice breaking. "If the sheriff won't listen, what do we do?" Her eyes searched Cross's face, desperate for an answer. He glanced at Arthur, who met his look with a grim nod. "Sometimes the chain of command gets it wrong," the old man said. "In the field, we listen to the dogs. They hear what we can't. They know." Above them, the storm rolled on, thunder muting the edges of their fear, but down here every sound seemed magnified. The faint echo of dripping water, the steady scratch of Rex's nails, the faint ringing in their ears from the last knock. Cross set his jaw and spoke quietly but firmly. "We don't ignore this. Whatever is down there, we're not leaving it." Rex gave a sharp bark, as if he understood every word, and pressed harder against the hatch, determined to show them the truth hidden beneath Crestwood's floor. Cross waited until the halls above were silent, and the last of the nurses had gone off shift. He carried the crowbar again, its weight heavy in his hands, and Kelly stayed close behind, with a flashlight clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Arthur had insisted on coming, but they convinced him to stay at the top of the stairs where he could keep watch. His warning words echoed in their ears as they moved toward the hatch. "If you're going to open it, do it quick. Evil hides in places just like that." Rex was already waiting, his body pressed low against the steel, his tail stiff with tension. He turned his head when Cross approached, gave a sharp bark, and then returned his nose to the seam of the hatch as though urging him forward. Cross planted the crowbar beneath the rusted edge, muscles straining as he forced it down. The hatch groaned, metal grinding against metal, flakes of rust breaking loose and falling like brittle snow. Kelly aimed the flashlight, her breath catching in her throat, when at last the lock gave way from within with a shuddering snap. The hatch opened a few inches before sticking, but it was enough. A rush of air burst upward, cold and damp, carrying with it the heavy stench of mold and rot. Kelly gagged and pressed a sleeve against her mouth, her stomach turning at the foulness. Cross pulled harder, until the hatch swung back, revealing a narrow shaft cut deep into the earth. The ladder that led down was iron, corroded, and slick with age. The beam of Kelly's flashlight revealed nothing but darkness below. Rex did not hesitate. With a low growl, he squeezed into the opening and began to descend, his claws scraping against the rungs as he lowered himself step by step in a way only a trained dog could manage. His bark echoed once in the hollow space, sharp and commanding, and then faded into the deep. Kelly's hands trembled as she pointed the light after him. "He's already gone," she whispered. Cross swung his legs over the edge and started down after him. The ladder groaned under his weight but held. Kelly followed, her flashlight trembling so badly the beam shivered across the walls. The further they went, the colder the air became, until it felt as though they had stepped into the heart of winter. When their feet hit the ground, at last they found themselves in a tunnel. The walls were lined with old brick, much of it crumbling, patches of steel beams bolted to hold back the shifting earth. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, steady drops that splashed against the muddy floor. The smell was nearly unbearable, thick with rot and something sharper beneath it, like oil or gunpowder. Rex stood waiting, his chest heaving, ears trained forward into the darkness that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. He gave a low bark, urging them to follow. Cross raised his flashlight, his jaw tightening. "Stay close," he told Kelly, though his own voice quivered. Together they stepped forward, deeper into the earth, where the stench grew stronger and the walls seemed to close in around them. The tunnel stretched on longer than Kelly ever expected, each step echoing in the cold air, each drop of water falling like a clock that had been ticking for decades. The beam of her flashlight shook across the walls, showing places where the bricks had crumbled and soil pressed through, but always the steel beams held just enough to keep the passage open. Rex moved ahead, his paws splashing through shallow puddles, his body tense with every sound. He did not sniff casually as dogs sometimes do, but with purpose, each breath pulling in the story of the place. Cross followed close behind, his own light sweeping left and right, his hand never far from the pistol on his belt. The stench grew heavier until Kelly's throat burned, and just when she thought she could not stand it anymore, the tunnel widened. They stepped into a chamber hidden beneath the earth, and the sight stole the words from her lips. Against the walls stood old metal cots, their frames rusted but still upright, thin mattresses rotting into scraps of cloth. Heavy chains hung from the stone, some still bolted, others broken, their iron eaten by time. The walls were covered in carvings, lines etched deep by hands desperate to leave something behind. Names, initials, dates scratched into the stone. Some were so faded they were almost gone, but others looked fresh, as if carved only months ago. Kelly raised her flashlight higher and read the words aloud, her voice trembling. "Help us. Still here. Don't forget." Her stomach turned, and she pressed her free hand against her chest. "This wasn't just a tunnel," she whispered. "It was a prison." The thought of people lying on those cots, chained like animals, breathing this poisoned air, made her knees weak. She turned in a slow circle, her heart breaking with each word she read, each name scratched into the walls by someone who refused to vanish without a trace. Arthur's warning about evil hiding beneath the home rang in her ears, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Cross stepped closer to one wall, his light catching on a date carved into the stone, 1973. He moved along the wall and found another, 1996, then another from 2018, decades apart, yet the same kind of desperate marks. He exhaled slowly. "This went on for years," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. Rex broke the silence with a low growl that rose from deep in his chest. His ears were pricked forward, his hackles standing along his spine. He wasn't looking at the walls or the cots. His attention was fixed on a narrow passage that branched off from the chamber, its mouth jagged and black, leading into more darkness. He took a step forward, then glanced back at them, his amber eyes flashing with warning. Something was waiting beyond that passage. Something alive. Kelly gripped Cross's arm, her pulse racing. "He hears something," she whispered. Rex growled again, sharper now, his body rigid, his nose lifted to catch a scent, carried faintly on the foul air. Cross raised his flashlight, but the passage swallowed the light whole, offering nothing but shadows. The chamber around them felt suddenly smaller, as though the names on the walls were whispering for them to leave. Yet Rex stood his ground, every part of him saying they had only begun to uncover what the darkness had been hiding. The chamber held its silence like a grave, broken only by the dripping water and the low growl rumbling from Rex's chest. Cross kept his flashlight pointed at the narrow passage where the dog's eyes were fixed, his own body tight with caution. Kelly clutched her sweater with one hand, the beam of her light trembling in the other. The darkness ahead seemed endless, pressing against them with a weight that felt almost alive. Then, beneath the sound of dripping and the storm above, something else stirred. A voice, faint and raw, carried from the shadows. Kelly gasped. thinking at first her ears had betrayed her. But then came another sound, a whisper too weak to be mistaken for echo. "Please, help." Her flashlight jerked toward the noise and caught movement. From the black throat of the tunnel, two shapes crawled forward on hands and knees. They emerged slowly, blinking against the sudden light, skin pale and gaunt, eyes wide with fear. One was a woman, her hair tangled and streaked with gray, though she couldn't have been older than 30. The other, a man, thin to the point of looking hollow, his lips cracked and bleeding. Kelly's throat closed as she recognized them. Posters had hung for months at the grocery store. Flyers passed out on the sidewalks. These were the missing. The ones the town whispered about. Names carried in prayer chains and vigils. Everyone feared they had been lost forever. Yet here they were, crawling into the light, broken but breathing. Kelly's tears blurred her sight until she could barely see. Rex moved first. He padded toward them carefully, his tail low, his steps steady. He sniffed the air, then lowered his body beside the woman, pressing his warm flank against her trembling frame. She let out a sob and clutched a handful of his fur as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. The man collapsed onto the stone floor, his shoulders shaking with silent cries. Rex nudged his face gently, licking the dirt and blood from his skin, grounding him back into life. Cross knelt quickly, pulling his radio from his belt, though he knew the signal wouldn't reach through the earth. "We've got survivors," he whispered, his voice sharp with urgency. He examined their wrists and ankles, raw with fresh wounds, the marks of chains that matched the rusted cuffs bolted to the walls. His jaw tightened with fury, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You're safe now," he said firmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. Kelly could hardly breathe as she touched the woman's shoulder, her hands gentle as if afraid the touch alone would shatter her. "You're alive," she whispered. "You're really alive." The woman nodded faintly, her lips trembling, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes darted toward the black passage they had crawled from, wide with terror. Kelly understood at once. Someone had kept them here. Someone had walked those halls and left them chained in the dark. The chamber no longer felt ancient and forgotten. It felt active, alive, a wound that was still bleeding. Rex lifted his head sharply, ears pricked toward the tunnel again, his body tense. Whatever horror had done, this was not gone. It was still here, and it could return at any moment. The survivors had barely caught their breath when Rex's ears shot up and his body stiffened. His growl came low and steady, rolling through the chamber like a warning siren only he could sound. Cross froze, listening hard. At first, he heard nothing beyond the drip of water, but then it came, faint at first, then clearer with every second, the steady rhythm of footsteps echoing through the narrow passage. They were slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if the person making them felt no need to rush. Kelly raised her trembling flashlight toward the tunnel, her heart hammering in her chest. The weak beam caught something flickering against the wall, a glow, warmer than their harsh lights, a lantern. Someone was coming, carrying fire through the darkness like it belonged to them. The two survivors whimpered, clutching at Rex's fur, their fear rising as the footsteps grew louder. Rex shifted instantly, planting himself in front of them, his body tense, teeth bared, hackles standing tall along his spine. Cross lifted his sidearm, the cold weight of it heavy but necessary in his grip. He raised his other hand to signal Kelly to stay behind him, but she could not move. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she stared down the passage, the glow swelling until it lit the jagged mouth like dawn creeping into night. The figure appeared slowly, shoulders stooped beneath the lantern's halo, steps careful but confident. When the face emerged from the shadows, Kelly let out a strangled gasp. Her flashlight wavered as recognition struck her like a blow. Cross's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Arthur's warnings upstairs rang in his ears, but nothing could have prepared him for the truth standing before them. Dr. Edwin Hale, the man who had once run Crestwood with gentle words and warm smiles, The man the town had mourned after his supposed car accident 5 years ago. The man whose portrait still hung in the entryway of the home. Celebrated as a figure of compassion and grace. But here he was, alive, very much alive, his face thinner, his hair gone to gray, his eyes burning with a light that was not kindness but something harder, twisted, unhinged. "You shouldn't be here," Hale said, his voice calm, almost soothing, but laced with menace beneath the steady tone. He held the lantern higher, its glow flickering across the rusted cots, the chains, the names carved into the stone. His lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "This place is not for you." The survivors whimpered again, curling tighter behind Rex. The dog snarled with such force it echoed back through the tunnel. Cross tightened his grip on the gun, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Step back," he ordered, his voice sharp. Hale did not move. Instead, he tilted his head, studying them like curiosities trespassing in a world only he understood. "You don't know what you've uncovered," Hale murmured. "You don't know what this means." His eyes gleamed as he looked at the hatch, at the chains, at Rex snarling in the lantern light. "But I do," Kelly whispered, her voice breaking. "Dear God, it was you." Hale's gaze snapped to her, and the madness behind his calm expression deepened. "I am the keeper," he said softly, almost reverently. "And you've just broken the seal." The lantern flame wavered as Dr. Hale stepped further into the chamber, his gaze fixed not on the survivors or Kelly, but on Rex. The dog's growl rumbled like thunder deep in his chest, steady and ready, his body low to the ground, and his teeth glinting in the glow. Hale's hand shifted, and from beneath his coat he pulled a rusted length of iron, jagged at the edge, more like a broken tool than a weapon. Yet in his grip it looked deadly. "You shouldn't have come," Hale hissed, his calm tone cracking into something sharper. Then, with surprising speed for a man his age, he lunged. The motion was fast, but Rex was faster. The shepherd launched forward with a snarl, a blur of muscle and fury, and clamped his jaws around Hale's arm before the weapon could strike. The lantern tumbled, its flames sputtering against the damp ground, shadows spinning wildly across the walls. Hale shouted in rage, his weapon clattering against the stone as he struggled to rip free. Rex's teeth sank deeper, unrelenting, his body locked with the force of instinct and training. Cross moved in instantly, his gun raised, but in the narrow tunnel the fight was chaos. Hale swung his free arm, catching Cross across the face, and they both stumbled into the wall. Cross pulled the trigger, the gunshot exploding like thunder underground, the bullet sparking against brick and filling the chamber with acrid smoke. Kelly screamed and dropped to her knees, pulling the two survivors into her arms, shielding their frail bodies as shards of stone sprayed around them. Rex held on, refusing to let go even as Hale slammed him hard against the wall. The blow knocked the air from the dog, a yelp tearing from his throat, but still his teeth stayed locked. Blood trickled down Hale's arm, his fury twisting his face into something monstrous. "You don't understand," he spat, his voice rising over the echoing chaos. "This is bigger than you, bigger than all of you." Cross lunged again, grabbing for Hale's wrist and wrenching the weapon away. The rusted iron scraped across the floor, out of reach. The two men grappled, their bodies slamming against the narrow walls, fists striking, boots grinding into the mud. Hale fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, his strength shocking for someone thought to be long dead. Cross gritted his teeth, straining to overpower him, every muscle burning. Rex suddenly let go of Hale's arm only to leap higher, jaws snapping around his shoulder, dragging him down. Hale roared in pain, collapsing under the combined weight of man and dog. The survivors whimpered against Kelly's chest, her heart racing as she watched the battle unfold. Powerless, but praying Rex would hold. Hale made one last frantic attempt, his hand clawing toward the discarded weapon, but Cross was quicker. He slammed Hale's wrist into the ground and snapped the cuffs around him with a decisive click. The sound rang louder than the gunshot, final and cold. Hale lay panting, bloodied and restrained, his wild eyes burning even as Rex stood over him, chest heaving, fur matted, a low growl still vibrating through the air. Kelly tightened her arms around the survivors, tears streaming down her face. In the flickering light of the fallen lantern, the battle was over, and it was Rex who had won it. The first light of dawn bled into the sky, just as the quiet grounds of Crestwood filled with sirens and the thrum of engines. Patrol cars lined the front entrance, their lights painting the walls red and blue, while agents in jackets marked with bold white letters carried equipment down the front steps and into the basement corridor. The air smelled of mud and exhaust, mixed with the stale dampness that drifted up from the tunnels. Officers called out orders, their voices sharp with urgency, and soon a steady line of men and women moved in and out, hauling crates of evidence from beneath the nursing home. The hatch yawned open like a wound in the floor, and beyond it lay the network no one had imagined existed. Teams descended with ropes and floodlights, and what they uncovered made even hardened lawmen turn pale. The tunnel system stretched in every direction, narrow corridors feeding into hidden chambers, and eventually opening to exits disguised in the woods on the edge of town. Every path told the same story. Cots rotted into rust, chains eaten by years of moisture, and walls scarred by names that spanned generations. Boxes of belongings were pulled out, wallets, clothing, photographs, trinkets, all tagged and catalogued with trembling hands. It was evidence of lives taken and held, and it spoke of a darkness that had hidden in plain sight for decades. By mid-morning, the lawn outside Crestwood was crowded. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, microphones were shoved toward anyone who looked like they might speak. The sheriff stood grim, faced at the top of the steps, refusing comment, while FBI agents pushed the press back behind barricades. Whispers spread like wildfire. Names of the missing, the revelation that 2 survivors had been found alive, the shocking truth that Dr. Edwin Hale had not died but had been the architect of the nightmare. Yet amid the chaos and the storm of voices, in a quiet corner of the courtyard, lay Rex. His side was bandaged hastily, his fur clotted with blood where Hale had struck him. His breaths came shallow and labored, each one a rough drag that made Kelly's heart clench as she knelt beside him. Arthur had wheeled himself close, his trembling hand resting on the dog's head. Rex's muzzle lay heavy across the old man's lap, his amber eyes dull with exhaustion but still flicking toward the bustle around him, as though unwilling to surrender his watch. Arthur bent forward, his voice low and rough, meant for the dog's ears alone. "You saved them, boy. You did what men couldn't." His hand stroked the scarred fur with reverence, his eyes wet, though he refused to let the tears fall. "In my day, I saw soldiers break under less, but not you. Not you." Kelly brushed her hand along Rex's neck, whispering through her own tears, "Hold on, please, just hold on." Cross stood nearby, silent, his face shadowed with the weight of everything they had uncovered, but his gaze never left the shepherd. The world was finally seeing the tunnels, finally facing the horror buried beneath Crestwood. But those who knew the truth understood that it had been Rex who forced the light into the dark. Weeks passed, and the wounds left by that terrible night began to mend, though none of them would ever fade completely. Crestwood Nursing Home reopened under strict new safeguards, its basement sealed, its doors reinforced, its halls filled with brighter light and steadier watch. The residents returned slowly, some nervous to come back, others relieved to find the place alive again rather than shuttered with shadows. Kelly walked the halls with her head higher now, no longer only a nurse, but someone who had helped uncover the truth buried beneath their feet. Cross visited often, keeping a steady presence, his uniform a reminder that watchful eyes would never again drift away from Crestwood's corners. The 2 survivors taken from the tunnels began their own journey of healing. They were moved to a safe center in town, surrounded by care and patience. Their faces were still thin, their eyes wary, but every week they grew stronger. The town donated clothes and meals, small gestures of kindness meant to stitch them back into a community that had nearly lost them. The carvings found in the chamber were preserved in photographs, each name carefully traced and recorded. It was impossible to know the fate of all those who had left their marks, but no one would let them be forgotten again. By the time autumn leaves began to scatter across Crestwood's lawn, a memorial stood near the courtyard. It was simple, built of stone, carved with the names discovered below the home, some weathered, some recent, all carried upward at last from the dark. The townspeople gathered for its unveiling. Rows of chairs lined with residents, nurses, families of the missing, and curious neighbors. The air held a mix of grief and pride, a silence heavy with respect. Arthur Greaves wheeled himself forward, leaning on a cane when he rose. His hand trembled as he held his notes, though his voice carried strong enough to silence the murmurs. "Evil hides in silence," he said, his words echoing in the crisp air. "But sometimes it takes a dog to make the world listen." He paused, his gaze falling to Rex, who sat proudly at his side. This shepherd didn't just bark at shadows. He pulled open the earth and dragged the truth into the light. For that, he is not just a dog to us. He is our guardian. Applause rippled through the crowd, quiet at first, then swelling until it filled the courtyard. Kelly wiped at her eyes, unable to stop her smile. Cross stood behind Rex, his hand resting on the dog's back, his own chest tight with pride. The scars along Rex's side were still visible, a reminder of the fight he had endured, but he held himself tall, ears pricked, tail curled steady at his paws. He did not flinch from the sound of clapping or the camera flashes. He simply sat, watchful as ever, amber eyes scanning as though still guarding the town that owed him everything. That night, as the last visitors drifted away and the memorial stones caught the glow of the setting sun, Rex remained at Arthur's side. His scars would never fade, but neither would his loyalty. For the residents of Crestwood, for the survivors, for the families who now had names to mourn, Rex was not only a dog. He was the hero who had carried their truth out of darkness, and he would watch over them always. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.